You guys didn't expect this video to be up on time, did you? I mean, this is me we're talking about. About 3 days ago, my computer was taken over by a spooky computer virus. In all seriousness though, guys, my computer totally got hit by a pretty nasty virus a few days ago, and I just got my computer working again, so today we're gonna get it up. This is version 2.0 of my Goosebump control deck, aka Let Fear Control You. And deck list up. As always, if you're just here to net deck the deck list, then here it is. Please enjoy. All I ask is that you leave me a like on your way out. For the rest of us, you might notice that this is a very purely Frighten-based deck. Just about every single card in the entire deck frightens in some way. I know it's a little bit heavy. If you're going to make this a more competitive deck, you might not want to focus so heavily on Frightened, but I wanted to show you the real power of Frighten and just how all of the different cards work. The main we'll be using is the new Nightmare Moon, Mistress of the Night. Absolute Discord was nice enough to give us a main character that focuses on Frighten, so we're going to take advantage of it. Its flip condition is when you confront this card's problem, turn this card over, which isn't that difficult. We're going to be using a very simple to solve problem for our first problem, so we should be able to get this flipped on turn 2 or 3. It's also one of those mains that it's not central for us to flip right away because her effect is kinda costly, so it's okay if we can't flip her until turns 5 or 6, but preferably we'd like to flip her as early as possible to get that 3 power. Rainbow Dash Goosebump Giver is the entire reason that this deck even became a thing in the first place. Rainbow Dash's effect is, after an opponent's friend is frightened, you can exhaust this to frighten another friend. This makes all of your frightened effects twice as potent. It also lets you snipe some unexpected friends. Let's say you play a card that lets you frighten one of your opponent's friends at a problem. Well, you frighten that friend at a problem, and then you can frighten a friend somewhere else that you would normally be able to. For example, you could frighten a friend at home, or you could frighten a friend on the other problem. Rainbow Dash Goosebump Giver is still a 3-of. I think it'll be a 3-of for a very long time in Frighten decks. Speaking of Frightened staples, I think Changeling Drone is a very important card that also came with the Absolute Discord set. This card has +2 power for each Frightened friend in play. That's yours and your opponent's. One thing that people get wrong with the Frightened deck all the time is people assume that the power from frightening friends comes from the fact that your opponent has a bunch of useless friends because they're all flipped face down. That's not necessarily the case. Frightened is all about applying pressure. It's forcing your opponent to make the decision to unfrighten their friends, or give up certain friends, or play around the fact that a lot of their cards are frightened. It's a special kind of control because it's not necessarily telling your opponent no, it's telling your opponent if you want to continue playing, you have to do so on my terms. Most strategies are pretty precise in just how many action points they cost, and playing something like Frighten makes it so your opponent has to factor in how much it's going to cost them to unfrighten friends. Why am I telling you all of this on Changeling Drone? Well, that's because Changeling Drone adds another element to the pressure. Your opponent now not only has to worry about not being able to use certain friends, which is okay because you can save up for a few turns. Changeling Drone is an immediate thing that they have to deal with. If they let their friends stay frightened and don't take care of it, then you have this giant Changeling Drone monster that can just go and solve whatever problem it wants to and win all kinds of face-offs. Crystal Guard is actually one of my favorite cards in the deck, and it has been since it came out. So you can pay 3, it has 3 power, so it pays for itself with power, and whenever you move this card to a problem, you can exhaust this and pay 1 to frighten an opposing friend at that problem. Another thing that I love about this card is how well it combos with Rainbow Dash Goosebump Giver. So you move this to a problem where one of your opponent's friends are at, you exhaust it, you pay the 1, you frighten that friend. And then you exhaust Goosebump Giver, and the frighten ricochets off that friend and hits something at home or on the other problem that you wanted to hit. It's just so much fun, and if you have multiple Goosebump Givers, then you can do it multiple times. So it's like you frighten a friend, it ricochets 3 times and hits 3 other friends. It's just too awesome. There's also a problem we'll be using that kind of combos with this, where you can actually give this character Swift, so that during your next turn, after this unexhausts, you can move it home for 1, and then move it to a problem for 2, and then pay the 1 to exhaust it, and then frighten another friend. And it's a little bit cheaper in the long run, and it's just little things like that that'll save you action points in the end and let you do more things. Plus, like I said before, 3 power! It's not even losing any power to get this effect. For whatever reason, Absolute Discord gave us another version of Princess Luna, but they made Celestia's better. I have no idea why. Princess Luna's was already an amazing Frighten effect, and for some reason Celestia's just always got to be a little bit better than Luna. When the centers play, you may frighten a friend. This isn't just a friend at the problem. Princess Luna is only at the problem, but this is just any friend in play. It's 4 for 3 power, which is still kind of bad, but so is Luna, so it gets an off on that. It only has a 2 color requirement, whereas Princess Luna's is 4, and this has a chaos effect now. When this card is flipped for a face-off, you can frighten a friend involved in the face-off, which is awesome. The last blue card we'll look at is Chief Thunderhooves. Chief Thunderhooves is kind of a controversial card right now. I'll be completely honest, it's probably the worst of the Frighten friends that are involved in any Frighten deck. It costs 3 for 3 power, it pays for itself with power, which is kind of good, I guess, but it mainly revolves around Pumped, and Pumped is very slow. With Frighten, you need to have access to your Frightening like right off the bat, because you need to know where to apply pressure, and you need to start applying that pressure and making some kind of use of it. But Pumped effects are by nature slow, and therefore not as powerful as effects that don't require pumped. Now you would think that being a pumped card, this would have some kind of amazing effect to make up for how slow it is. It really doesn't. The main problem is your opponent can easily play around this by just not playing to this card's problem. It's still sort of a problem for them, like it is a good way to control the board to make it so your opponent can't play to this card's problem, so you're controlling that problem and locking it down, but at the same time, your opponent can easily just pay the 2 action points to unfrighten the friend right after it happens, and they're going to get their 2 action points back way faster than you'll get another card from Pumped. I'm keeping him in here for the time being, but if another card comes out in the new set that has Frightens, chances are Chief Thunderhooves might be playing in his last deck. Our purple friends are very basic. It's going to be Princess Luna and then some cards to fill Princess Luna's color requirements. So Princess Luna is just a worse version of Princess Celestia, like I said before. No chaotic effect, takes double the color requirement, and can only frighten a friend at the problem that she's played at. But nonetheless, she is a card with Frighten, and we are going to use her. Twilight Sparkle, Cutie Mark Consultant, 4 for 4 power, no color requirement, so it's going to be the easiest way to get Princess Luna on the board. And Bright Bulb, one of my favorite purple cards, been kicking it around since the first set and is still awesome. You can play it on a problem, and you can exhaust this when your opponent plays a character to that problem so you can move it home. He's a great little bodyguard, and I love him to death, and he's going to stay forever. His biggest problem is you need 2 of these to fulfill the color requirements of Princess Luna, but that's not even that big of a deal, because you can just use him to solve some problems until you can get that Luna on board. Getting on to events, we'll start with Faint of Heart. Faint of Heart is a very simple card. Pay 1 and just straight up dismiss a friend that is Frightens. This should be a pretty obvious card. You frighten a friend, and then you just straight get rid of it so your opponent doesn't even have the choice of bringing it back. It's just used to get rid of specific cards that are too problematic to keep on the board. Thunderclap is still a neat little frighten card. Pay 2 to frighten a friend with 2 or less power. You can use this with Goosebump Giver Rainbow Dash to just kind of ricochet your fighting. So if your opponent has something like an All-Team Organizer in play or like a Cloud Chaser, you can play this, frighten that, and then ricochet it off onto one of their 3 or 4 power ponies. Unending Nightmare is one of my favorite events in the entire deck, because you can use it right after your opponent unfrightens one of their friends, and it becomes re-frightens. Okay, so let me explain something to you guys. Your opponent, after you start frightening their friends, is going to start calculating their AP so they can figure out what they can do. And as soon as they have enough AP to do something, they're going to go, okay, I'm going to start by unfrightening this friend. So they do that, and then you play this, it becomes re-frightened, and now they're down that 2 action points that they paid, and they've got to figure out something else to do. This is probably one of the most annoying wrenches you can throw in your opponent's gears when they're playing against a frightened deck, because they're like, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to do, and now they can't do exactly that because they're going to be down 2 action points lower than what they thought they were going to. One of my favorite plays of all time is if you play this right after they unfrighten a friend, and they're like, okay, I'll just do something else. And then they try to unfrighten again, And then you play this again, and they flip it back face down, and then they just immediately end their turn because you just took away their entire play. It's just so much fun, you guys. Cutie Pox Scare is kind of your oh no button. If things aren't going your way, or if your opponent's playing a rush deck that's getting a little too out of hand, you can play this at the start of the score phase and just move everybody home so your opponent can't solve the problem and you're pretty much starting from scratch. This is also a really nice combo with the next card we'll be talking about, but it's mainly an oh no button, so if your opponent gets out of hand, you can just stop it, and it gives you one more turn to get your ducks in a row. Spooky Scary Story, despite having an amazing name, is one of the most situational Frighten cards in the deck. You have to frighten friends that are at home, which can be kind of difficult. The main way you want to do this is use Cutie Pox Scare during your opponent's turn, and then during your turn play this because they're guaranteed to have friends at home. It also has the Chaos effect when this card is flipped, Frighten a Friend at Home. That's actually a lot more useless than it sounds because during a face-off, chances are your opponent's going to have as many characters onto problems as possible, so it's a little harder to work around. So there's going to be a lot of times your opponent just doesn't have any friends at home to frighten. It'll happen once in a while though, so whatever. Its main use is comboing it with Cutie Pox Scare so that you can frighten friends at home, and then maybe even use Goosebump Giver to ricochet that off to other friends or whatever. It's a situational card, but the situations it can be used in are very good. As for resources, we'll start with the most important resource in the deck, the Scariest Cave in Equestria. Play to your home, and rallying a frightened friend costs +1 action point. Holy cow, that is good. A lot of you are going to look at this like, oh, it's just +1 action point, it only costs 3? Well, that's not even that good. It is amazing, guys, because think about it. What can your opponent normally do with 6 action points? They can unfrighten 3 friends. Well, with this, they can unfrighten 2 friends. Are you starting to see it? If you frighten 2 of your opponent's friends and they pay to have both of them unfrightened, it's the same as them having normally paid for 3 unfrightened friends. In a normal game, you can expect yourself to frighten at the very least 10 friends. If you have this in play, and your opponent unfrightens those 10 friends, then it costs them 30 action points, where it normally would have cost them 20 action points. That puts them down another 10 action points. It's just so good. It's very necessary and wants to be one of your very first plays. The only reason we're not running this at 3 is because it's unique, and having the other ones in your hand would make them completely dead. So you play one, you get it out there. If it happens to not go off, then whatever. It's not a huge deal, but it is a game changer if you can get it off. Next, we'll look at Spitfire's Badge. Spitfire's Badge isn't that great. You can pay 1 to play it, and then during your main phase, you can pay 2 and retire this card to frighten an opponent's friend. The main reason that it's good and it's in here is the fact that it can frighten any friend, and you can use this with Goosebump Giver to start getting to some really neat numbers. The main thing that kind of hurts frighten cards a little bit is when they can only frighten cards in a specific area. So having a card that can just frighten anywhere is pretty good. Its other effect lets you retire this to give one of your characters blue until the end of the phase. I've never used this. I don't think it's that useful in this kind of deck. It's mainly just used to pay 3 to frighten a friend. That's about it. The last resource we'll look at is Train Tracks. It plays to your home, and every turn you can exhaust this and pay 1 to frighten one of your opponent's friends at a problem, and while this card is exhausted, that friend cannot unfrighten. I know this sounds like an amazing card. Its main downside, though, is your opponent can exhaust 2 of their characters to dismiss this card, and they can do it during their turn. So they can totally just get rid of this card whenever they want to, but again, the entire deck is around pressure. Your opponent is now going to have 2 friends that are not that useful unless your opponent's playing an orange deck or something. Normally, it's going to be your opponent has 2 friends that are now not going to be useful for the rest of the turn. This card is about as pressure-centric as it gets. The first time you use this, your opponent has 1 frightened friend that they can unfrighten and is useless. The next turn, it's 2 friends that are frightened and cannot be unfrightened and are useless. Then 3, then 4, then 5. This is something that your opponent has to eventually deal with, or it's just going to destroy their entire game. Plus, on top of this, if you have a Changeling drone out, that's just getting bigger and your opponent can't do anything about it. They have to eventually take the hit, exhaust 2 of their characters to get rid of this, and then start paying all the action points to unfrighten their friends. We're only using 1 Troublemaker, and for once, it's not Yellow Parasprite. Yay! Now, obviously, a lot of people probably saw this coming. We're going to be using Pony of Shadows at 3 because it lets you frighten a friend at its problem. I'm going to level with you guys. I'm mainly using this for the fact that it's another Frighten card. It's actually not a very good card. It does sound kind of neat that when it's uncovered you can frighten a friend at its problem, and if you were playing some kind of deck that revolved around troublemakers, you could just flip this up, unflip it, flip it up, unflip it, and then just start frightening a bunch of things. But its main problem stems from the fact that it's worth 3 points. If you use this too late in the game and you don't have enough ways to frighten friends, your opponent can just easily get 3 extra bonus points pretty much anytime they want to. If you lay one of these down, you have to be ready to defend this card with your life, because once they get that 3 points boost in beating it, they are going to be at a slightly bigger advantage than if you just never played this card at all. So you need to just start getting some points, controlling some things, making this card last as long as possible so your opponent cannot get those points. Finally, we'll be looking at problems. Cloud bursting is going to be our main starting problem almost all the time because it only takes one of each color to solve. And this is the easiest way to flip Luna as soon as possible. Oh, I'm sorry. Nightmare Moon is the easiest way to flip Nightmare Moon as quickly as possible. 800 Year Sweltering Heat is probably one of the most important cards for the Frighten deck. When a player confronts this problem, that player may pay 1 to frighten an opponent's friend here. That's good for a couple of reasons. First of all, obviously, if you're controlling your opponent's board correctly, then you're going to be able to confront this card like all the time and just keep frightening friends at that problem. Secondly, if you have a Changeling drone out and it's not at this problem so your opponent can't touch it, if your opponent starts frightening your friends at this problem trying to use the effect against you, then your Changeling drone gets bigger and it's not even that big of a deal. Desperately Seeking Spike is kind of an interesting card. It's mainly a way to accelerate our deck, but it can backfire. If you play your cards right, then you can confront this problem, and every turn you confront it, you can reveal the top card of your deck, and if it's a friend, you can put it in your hand, otherwise you have to discard it, whatever. And if you're controlling the field correctly, then you can make it so your opponent isn't confronting this and isn't using the effect against you. High-speed chase is our other one of. When this card enters play, each player may move one of their characters to this problem. This is mainly good during your opponent's turn, oddly enough. Like, if your opponent initiates a face-off, and then you happen to win or lose, it doesn't really matter. But your opponent flips this up after the face-off's done, then your opponent, because it's their turn, has to move their friend first. So your opponent moves one of their friends, and then if you have a Pony Royal Guard in play, you can move it to the problem and then frighten that friend. It's pretty lolsy. If you happen to flip it during your turn, it's whatever. Like, it's a free movement card, so who cares? It can backfire a little bit, which is why it's only at 1. Crash Course is the card I was talking about before. It's the card that can give your Pony Royal Guard Swift, and so you can move your Royal Guard over here and then frighten something, and then next turn you can pay 1 to move it home and then just move it right back here for the 2. I think it's pretty interesting. I think it's pretty neat. Your opponent can use it too, but it takes 7 to solve, and if you're controlling the field correctly, they're not going to be able to get that too quick. So I think this is a pretty decent card for the deck. The last problem we'll be looking at is Through the Cave. When this card enters play, each player frightens one of their friends. This is probably the second most important problem in the deck, because if your opponent frightens one of their friends, then you can use Goosebump Giver to start frightening some of their other friends. This is another way to snipe friends. It's really cool. You have to frighten a friend too, but like, who cares? You frighten a friend that's not really that important, like a Luna or Celestia, and you give your Changeling drone +2 power. Woohoo, who cares? This card is almost never dead, and you always want to see it as many times as possible. And that's it for the deck profile. I'm sorry I kept you guys waiting on it for so long. I do hope it was worth the wait. If you have any thoughts on the deck, then leave them in the spooky comments below. Write the name of your crush in your hand, hit the like button, and scroll up and down 13 times or something scary will happen to you tomorrow. And finally, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest spooky kudo news. I'm sorry, guys. I really like that word. Spooky, 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 spooky. Have fun with the Let Fear Control You deck, and I will see you all later.